Today we're going to talk about the important Graha and the important Bhavas in the Navamsa. Just like all the other Vargas, there's those few critical things that will make or break the Navamsa. The first one is the important planet, which is Venus. Venus is the planet that represents marriage, and so obviously it's going to be important in the Navamsa chart, the horoscope that has to do with marriage. Venus is the sixth planet, and the Navamsa is the sixth Varga that Parashara mentions. So there's also the mathematical correlation between the two. So a good Venus goes a long way in making the Navamsa a good chart. Venus is sort of one of the planets of free will, in the sense that Venus is one of the planets that lets us make choices. Whether those choices are indeed free will or not, we're not going to get into right now, but the point I want to make is that Venus is the planet that helps us make choices, that we use to make choices. And how it does that is it helps us see if something is really going to be worth doing. What's worthwhile for us to do? Whenever we make a decision to see, would I be happier doing this or happier doing this, we're using our Venus. What's going to be more fulfilling? Which path will be more fulfilling? When Venus is in good shape, a person's able to choose things that over the long term are fulfilling. When Venus is in bad shape, the person chooses things that end up being disappointing or a source of unhappiness or not fulfilling. Okay, so first step is when we come to those choices in life, a good Venus helps us make good choices. Now, no matter what choice we make in life, things are always going to be different than we thought they would be. Right? You know, we think this, like, for instance, marriage. We marry a person, we have this vision of what it's going to be like married to that person. And invariably, it's not going to be that way. Then it's Venus that helps make the adjustments along the way to help a person remain happy with their choices that they made. So not only is Venus the planet that helps us see what's going to be most fulfilling to choose from in our lives, and also what keeps us happy and fulfilled along the way as we need to make the necessary changes. And that's really what marriage is all about. Marriage is about choosing someone that we think we'll be happy with, and then making the accommodations, behaving appropriately, working things out along the way to maintain the happiness and fulfillment. People who've got afflicted Venuses, they may make a choice and actually get involved with a great person, but they won't have the adaptability and the flexibility and the adjustability to adjust to the changing needs of the relationship, because as people grow and change, their needs are going to change. And so any relationship is constantly in motion. And that's really one of the important things that Venus has to represent, that ability to deal with the necessary changes in a relationship. And Venus is suited for this because Venus is a combination, just dosha-wise, Venus is a mix of Vata, Vata and Kapha. Okay? So it's a mix of wind and water. And of course it's wind that helps movement and change. And it is, Kapha or water that helps give sensitivity and also fulfillment. So it needs that dual nature to make all the adjustments along the path that people choose. Now, if a person chooses a marriage ashram, even within that ashram, a good Venus helps. A Venus is going to help them be diplomatic, which is, it goes a long way in making for a healthy, productive ashram life. Venus also has a lot to do with the devotion that a person has towards something. You know, do they indeed love it? And that's what helps us make those choices, because the choices Venus is making are not just choices that are material, like, oh, which job's going to give me the most money, but Venus weighs everything, and one of the things it weighs is what do I love more? You know, what is going to be more fulfilling to me because I love it? And that's a choice that's something that Venus always brings into its decision making. If Venus is in bad shape, a person may not do that, though. They may make decisions that have nothing to do with emotions or love at all, just sheer practicality or sheer numbers. And of course, over time, they won't have any fulfillment as a result. So if a person chooses ashram life for marriage, or a particular person to be married to, when they have a good Venus, then you can be sure that, one of the reasons they chose that because they loved it. They thought it was most worthwhile because they love it the most. And also the career we choose. People with strong Venuses are inclined to do things that they love, and that gives them enough fulfillment along the way that even if the rewards are not as great, like the financial rewards, or the person they marry is not the wealthiest or whatever, because they love that thing or that person, they still feel fulfilled along the way. So Venus is that critical planet to have good in the Navamsa chart. If it's bad in the Navamsa chart, a person will make choices not out of what it loves, but out of some other thing, perhaps an ideal or a religious ideal or, a fad, do what everyone else is doing. Who knows? But they'll make decisions that end up giving them what's not going to really be the most fulfilling to them. And then it'll also be really hard for them to adapt to it. A good Venus is always able to think of ways to bring in the missing elements into a relationship or into a lifestyle choice or into whatever ashram a person's in, and able to, live happily there. If Venus is not in great shape, though, if a person's missing some elements of their relationship, they really won't know how to bring those things in so much. They won't know how to adapt to the situation. And so they just aren't going to get more fulfillment. They can't negotiate it or bring it in. And eventually it becomes disappointing. So, because in the Navamsa has to do with that long-term path that we believe in, it's for that path that Venus is the most important. And it's Venus that makes that path, whatever it is, more bearable and more fulfilling. So we got to have Venus in good shape. Okay, Bhava-wise, the most important Bhava obviously is going to be the 9th Bhava, because the Navamsa is the 9th Varga. It's the Varga of the 9th house. So the 9th Bhava is going to be the important Bhava. This represents the path and the person's dedication to the path, and a person's ability to find a path that's meaningful, whether it's marriage path or whatnot. An afflicted 9th house in the Navamsa really dampers a person's chances of getting married. Okay? Venus or Venus's Lord or the 9th Lord in the Navamsa or the ruler of the 9th Lord in the Navamsa, those are the planets that more often than not make people finally tie the knot legally and spiritually in the sense of a wedding. So you've got to have those things good. Especially in modern culture, an afflicted 9th house makes it really, really hard for people to get married. People with strong 9th houses in the Navamsa, they more inherently believe in the social and religious institution of marriage. People with weak 9th houses usually don't believe in it as to such a great extent. Okay? So the 9th Bhava is the most important. Now an interesting thing with the Navamsa is, if we add up all the numbers in the number 9, which is 1, plus 2, plus 3, plus 4, plus 5, plus 6, plus 7, plus 8, plus 9, what do we get? We get 1 plus 2 is 3, plus 3 is 6, plus 4 is 10, plus 5 is 15, plus 6 is 21, plus 7 is 28, plus 8 is 36, plus 9 is 45. 4 plus 5 is 9. So adding up all the numbers in the number 9, we get the number 9. So this makes 9 a pure number, kind of like 1 is a pure number. You remember when we do that with the number 1, it comes out to a 1 as well. Then, if we square 9, 9 times 9 equals 81. 8 plus 1 equals 9. So when we do the mathematical manipulations, we end up with 9. Just like with 1, 1 times 1 is 1. We square 1, it's 1, right? All the numbers in 1 is 1. So 1 and 9 are the sort of two pure numbers. And that's why 1 is the beginning and 9 is the end. And those are the only, they say, real things. That's the path that the self is on and the knowledge and belief that's gained along that path, pretty much. Okay? So that's why these are really overall the two most important Vargas in a way. Okay? And this is why astrologers use them for the same thing, because the beginning and the end are essentially the same thing. And so we can look at everything in the chart through the Navamsa as well. We should look at anything we look in the Rashi, we should consider it in the Navamsa too if we want to do a full analysis of the chart. So the ninth Bhava is critically important in the Navamsa. It had been in bad shape. There's not so many Bhavas that can make up for it or give it some strength. With other Vargas we saw, we square 4 for the Chaturtamsha, we get 16, the 7th Bhava is important. If it's in good shape, it can help compensate for a bad 4th Bhava. But in the Navamsa, we don't have that. Okay? We just have to have a good 9th Bhava in the Navamsa if we want the person to be able to get on a path in life that they believe in, and that they can find meaning in, and that they can grow along. When the 9th is afflicted, the path or person that a person commits to ends up never being something that's validating to who they really are. And so it's much harder for them just to be who they are in the lifestyle or life path that they've chosen. So eventually they have to leave it. Okay, now one interesting thing about the difference between the first, number 1, first Varga, and number 9, is the square root of 1 is 1, because 1 times 1 is 1. The square root of 9, however, is 3. 3 times 3 is 9. So 9 is a number whose foundation is dependent upon the number 3. Okay? Because a number that whatever it squares out to is what it creates, and the square root is always the foundation of a number. So number 3 is the foundation of the number 9. So this lets us know that another important house that's important in the Navamsa that we don't find in most Vargas is the third, is the square root of that number, which is the 3rd Bhava in this case. So we have to also look at the 3rd Bhava in the Navamsa. Okay? Okay? And that almost looks like 2nd, 3rd. Okay? 3rd Bhava is critically important. Now we learned from the Drekana that the Drekana and the 3rd has lots to do with and we learned in our Bhava class that the 3rd house has to do with our social skills. And the Drekana has to do happiness with relatives, with people we're relating to, and our happiness with ability to deal with associates. That's the very foundation of the Navamsa, finding a path in life. Because no matter what path we're on, our ability to be on that path happily depends on our ability to relate, on our social skills. If we select marriage ashram, social skills are obviously going to be really important. In the Bala ashram, the youthful ashram of going to school and getting educated, obviously dealing with associates and teammates and other kids is critical. Okay? In the ashram, people go out to live in an ashram, a monastery. They're working with people, they're associating with people. There's a lot of people stuff going on. It's a community life. So all these different ashrams have to do with some element of community life. Okay? And so we have to have a good 3rd house in the Navamsa to have a good marriage or to have a good life in any ashram. Otherwise, we're constantly going to have trouble with our teammates, our associates, or the people we're relating to, which includes our spouse. So a good 3rd house is important in the Navamsa. And it also emphasizes just how important the Drekana is. This is probably why the 3 Vargas that are most heavily used in Vedic astrology are the Rashi, the Drekana, and the Navamsa chart. Okay? Even Western astrologers kept using some, they have it in their books. The medieval ones were using the Drekana chart. Okay? They didn't use the Navamsa, but they did use, I believe, the Dwadasamsa, dividing the chart into 12 pieces quite extensively. But the 3rd was an important division in medieval Western astrology. Some Western astrologers are still using it. So the 3rd house has a lot to do with our experiences and our knowledge or information. That creates our belief system and creates the idea of what path is worth following. So it has to do with our educational experiences and life experiences that help us decide what is worth doing. Okay? And another way to put it, if we know just how hard life is, it makes it easier to see the merits of any path we may choose. Because any path we choose is going to be full of difficulty. And if we know how hard life can be, in comparison, that difficulty can seem a blessing. So like in medieval Europe, people would often choose the path of ashram life, becoming monks and nuns, just so that they could have something to eat. Because, poverty was so rampant, there's such a shortage of food, because they didn't have agriculture like this, that living in a life in an ashram, in a monastery was easy compared to eking out a life somehow, as an indentured serf or whatever, where you're just toiling all day long for just a little bit to eat, with no opportunity for rise in life. So compared to that, the monastic life was really a nice way to live. So the third house has to do with the logic of our experiences, understanding our experiences to really know what life is like, and therefore know that this is a good path. That also is really a key in marriage. If we know what life is like with single, if we really remember and have experienced life as a single person trying to date, for instance, then we really understand just how good the path of marriage is. So when marriage gets difficult or we're not completely fulfilled, it's that third house that anchors us on that path. It goes, remember how hard it was when you weren't married? A lot of people forget this. One of my clients, I remember, they divorced their husband. They just didn't think that he was giving enough attention to them, and they just were bored. So they divorced their husband. 6 years later, they still hadn't met anyone else. They were financially struggling, and they were like, I wish I'd never gotten rid of my husband. At least then I didn't have all these worries I've got now, And she was still lonely. So it's a good third house that anchors, because it's the square root of the number 9, that anchors us on that path and lets us, realize that life is hard, and that's why I'm on this path. I'm not on this path because, this path is going to give me everything for free. I'm on this path because life is difficult. Third house, third bhava, it's difficult. And that's why I'm on it. And because this path is actually less difficult, this path is a blessing to even have, whether it's a marriage path, whoever I'm married to, whatever they or he looks like, however little attention they give me. The good third house makes us remember that it could be worse, okay? And not to take it for granted. And that gives a person the strength and will to stay on that path, to struggle when the path gets difficult, to, survive quarrels and difficulties with their partner, and to even to communicate with the partner, to struggle to make it better. But overall, it gives that foundation of helping us remember, the value of the path we chose. Remember, I decided to do this for a reason. I signed up to live in the ashram for a reason. But it's so easy to forget that reason once ashram life gets really hard. And lots of times people forget it. They'll have a bad third house, so they'll leave the ashram after being in there for 10, 20 years maybe, and then they'll realize just how terrible life really is. Okay? And, and remember, gosh, there was a reason I decided to get into that ashram. Or with marriage, people get married, it gets hard, they're not happy there as much as they thought they would be. They escape the marriage, they leave their wife or husband, and then they find out that, geez, life is really, really difficult without that person in my life. Now, sometimes, of course, it's not that way. Sometimes they had a bad ninth house, and so they married really badly. And so maybe later they'll get a second chance under a dasha that's better for the ninth house and marry somebody better. So that happens. But it's a good ninth house and a good third house together that gives a great marriage life or ashram life and helps us choose a path wisely, because it gives us the foundation of experience to choose wisely. And once we make the choice, it helps keep us anchored there, because we know that we chose this for a reason, and we're strong in that reason, and continue that reason. That's what the third house gives us. It gives us that strength and will to keep us on the path. Okay? But sometimes you'll see people have a pretty good ninth house. So they may actually have a pretty good marriage. Then they'll have a really bad third house or third lord in the Navamsa, and they go into the dasha that destroys that third house, and they just lose their commitment to that partner, okay, or to that path. And so they get out of it, and then they find that life really, really sucks off that path, okay? So we got to have that good third house too. So there is an extra house to look at in Navamsa, and that's the third. If the third house is strong and the ninth house is a bit weak, a person won't have the most enjoyable, won't choose the most enjoyable ashram, won't have the most meaningful marriage if the ninth house is in bad shape in the Navamsa. But if they have a good third house, they can still be anchored on that path and have so much more strength to stay on it. So they work together. The third house, they're inseparable. You can't separate 3 and 9. The minute you get 3, it squares to 9. The minute you have 9, the square root is 3. You have to look at both. It's a person's the happiness to have on the path, the meaning they find on their path, and just their strength to stay on that path, and that's the third house, that determines how well the person's going to be on the path, and therefore how much meaning the person finds in their life. So Venus, third lord, and ninth lord and third house and ninth house are the critical things to look at in the Navamsa. And an interesting thing, we know that Mars is the Karaka of the third Bhava, and it's the Karaka, the most important planet in the Drekana. Is Mars important in the Navamsa? Sure it is, but is it more important than other planets? Maybe a little bit, but Venus and Mars are really related. Venus has the martial side, and Mars has the Venus side. Okay? And I show that mathematically in the in Graha Sutras when I talk about the mass of the planets. So third planet Mars and sixth planet Venus have a lot of commonalities. And they're almost always used together, okay, in most things that we do. Now, Venus has this martial side. So Venus is still the dominating and important planet. It's not like you need to look towards Mars too, okay? But, if Mars is bad in the Navamsa, it's going to create so much more logical struggles and boundless quarrels in the Navamsa. It's not a good thing to have. But Venus has the martial side, and we also see that martial side in the avatar related to Venus, who was Parashurama, who was Rama wielding a huge axe, going around the world 20 times, killing the evil and evil kings that lack dharma. So, really the most martial warrior aspect of, Vishnu, of the avatars related to the planet, one of them is the one of Venus, okay, who was Parashurama, who just took so many heads, a real warrior here. So there is a strong martial side to Venus, just as there's a Venetian side to Mars. So Venus is the key planet. It goes a long ways. But Mars is also important. Just as in the Saptamsha, Jupiter is the key planet, but Venus is also pretty important too. And then, of course, in a woman's horoscope, Jupiter is important in the Navamsa because Jupiter is the husband. So Jupiter in the Navamsa in a woman's chart shows the husband's efforts to maintain the marriage and so on. Okay? If Jupiter's in bad shape in the Navamsa in a woman's chart and ruining things in the Navamsa, basically shows the husband is causing trouble in the marriage. And honestly, in women's charts who have a bad history of marriages and relationships, more often than not, you're going to find Jupiter being the culprit more than Venus. Okay? And the reason that is because ultimately, 90% of a relationship success or failure depends on what the husband is going to do or not do. If Jupiter's in bad shape, the woman's going to fall in love with a man who's not worth falling in love with, who's not going to be able to take care of a relationship and do the right thing in a relationship. And so the relationship is pretty much 90% chance it's going to be doomed. Okay, 10% chance that it'll be the other way, where what the woman does is really what determines what's going to happen in the relationship. But 90% of the time, if a relationship fails, it's the male's fault. And that's, so in a woman's chart, look at that Jupiter in the Rashi, Saptamsha, and Navamsa. And you'll pretty much always see it when women's marriages fail, when they have a history of relationships that dead end. It's because they most often fall in love with the wrong kind of guy. Okay? And that'll be shown by this afflicted bad Jupiter. So always look at Jupiter in a woman's chart when judging Navamsa and when studying relationship type things. Okay?